Keep it going. He is good. He is good. And he's worthy of all of our praise. Guys, do you feel the spring fever in the room? Come on, this is the time change. Winter's almost over. Come on, somebody. No, genuinely, I sense it. This is the room full of people that are expectant for God to move and expectant for encounter. And so my prayer for you is wherever you find yourself on the walk of faith or the faith journey, is that you would open up your heart tonight, sit on the edge of your seat, and know that God actually wants to be heard from, that he's not withholding from you, that he's not leading breadcrumbs and hoping that you can just solve the perfect puzzle to find him. He's actually died and rose and came back so that we could know him intimately and deeply. And so tonight, I believe that he's going to speak to you. I believe that some of you are going to get healing tonight for the first time in a long time. And I'm not just saying that because we're in a relationship series, and I can confidently tell you that every single person in this room has experienced victory in relationship and has experienced baggage and failure and has had traumatic experiences in the realm of relationship. And I know this, in Psalm 34, it says that God draws near to the brokenhearted. And so if you're in this space and you feel like that's where you're at, maybe you're not where you want to be, maybe you're single and you're sad that you are, you feel like you're behind, or maybe your family situation is less than ideal, and maybe you can't keep a friend to save your life. I don't know where you're at with all of the relationships that you have in your life, but if there's brokenheartedness there, I can promise you that God sees you. And I can promise you that he wants to draw near to you. Would you let him in? And would you come to him so that he can be your refuge? And I hope that this space tonight, as we navigate this topic of loving your enemies, that God can be a refuge to you. A place where he can bind up your wounds, heal you up, and then you can leave knowing that even if it feels like nobody else loves you, you know that the one that made you does, and that he's for you, and he's with you. And I just feel like God has something for you in this room, and I know that our team, we pray in this room at 3 o'clock every Thursday, and we walk amongst every single chair, from back row to front row. Honestly, we straighten up the chairs because Lakewood Youth goes crazy in here. There's like diagonal chairs, there's backward chairs. I'm like, what is going on? We pray over every single chair, and as we touch our hand on these chairs, I can't help but think that every single seat, there's a story, there's a history of relationships, whether it's be romantic or any other category, and that God sees you, and he's for you, and he wants to do some healing tonight. And so I'm gonna pray. Actually, I'm gonna read the text that we have tonight, and then I'm gonna pray, and we're gonna dive into it. I'm going to be reading out of Matthew 5:38 to 47. Now, before I dive in, Connor talked about last week about dating and being how do you be the most eligible person in the room? And he talked a lot about a lot of biblical principles about working on your own character instead of expecting all of these other people to do the work. And he had 4 points that I do not remember, but they're really good. They were good. Where are you? It was an amazing message, but as I was praying for this week, I was like, we love talking about new when it comes to relationships. I love talking about new friendships, it's fun to look ahead and to see what God could do and what God could have for you and who's your husband, all of it. I get it. It's fun. I love a sleepover, I love a girls' night, love hashing it out. But I think that what God wants to do is, before we look ahead, let's look back. Because have you heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people? And I think there's a lot of us walking around with a bunch of hurts that we don't think are going to carry their way into our future relationships, but they might. And you might be in a current relationship realizing that you're reacting based on an anxiety or a trigger or a wound, and you're like, ooh, I got some stuff to deal with tonight. And so as your pastor, my goal for us isn't to just go back and be sad, but it's to go back and bring God our wounds and say, help me and work with me and heal me, so that when I look forward, I'll look forward from a healed perspective. And so that's the goal for tonight. And hey, there is no condemnation or shame in this series. Connor said it before. And so everything I'm teaching you tonight, I hope that you receive it from pastors that love you and want freedom for you and want the fullness of Christ for you. All right, so I'm going to read out of Matthew 5:38 to 47. Jesus is teaching in the best sermon ever written or given. And so I will just be kind of expounding upon one of the best teaching that there is. And it's found in Matthew. He gives the Sermon on the Mount, and he's nearing the end in chapter 5. And he's talking about retaliation and then loving your enemies, which loving your enemies should be the marker of every Christian. It starts in verse 38. You have heard it said, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, which means your shirt, let him have your cloak, your jacket as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. And then he goes on to say in a segment called Love Your Enemies, you have heard that it is said, bless you, you have heard that it is said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? And then Jesus would go on to end this entire sermon with this line in Matthew 7. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. Jesus wants us to do these things so that we could have a house that is unshakable in the midst of a storm. And I think sometimes we think that this is a slap on the wrist, or why would Jesus ask something so crazy? He's for you. He asked you to do this because he wants you to build your house on a rock, so when the storms would come, that you wouldn't collapse into the sinking sand. And so let's talk about the past. Let's talk about some of our hurts, because I believe that God doesn't just want to do a new thing. He wants to restore all things. That means broken things and old things and things that we maybe would just rather forget. It is the ministry of reconciliation that our God calls what he has come down to do. And so I won't let you settle. And so our roadmap today is this. Who is your enemy? How do you love them? Why do you love them? And how do we pray for them? And the title of my message is this: House Rules. In this family, we love our enemies. I'm going to pray. God, I thank you for every person in this room. Even if they're just like a one-off spring break, came home with their friend, you have something for them. Lord, I thank you that your goal is restoration. When we would rather discard the old because it's uncomfortable and frustrating or makes us feel guilty and ashamed, you say, no, I want to make it new, and I want to make it whole, and I want to restore it. God, I thank you that when we would rather settle, you would have us fight and abide in you so that you could make all things new and that we would see your glory in full. We love you, Jesus. Would you speak to us, and would you be near to the brokenhearted tonight? Would people in this room feel the miraculous peace of your presence? And all of young adults said, amen. Thanks. Hey, Kendra. Is anyone new here? Is anyone here for spring, like just home for spring break? Okay, 1%. Spring break, man, how many of you aren't in college or school anymore and you just would kill for a spring break? Anyone? Yeah, me too, Tori. Same. God bless. Enjoy. Okay, so the opening illustration is going to get a little rogue. Are you okay with that? Okay, because I have spring fever pretty bad, and I was like, I just need to have fun up top and do some funny things. The topic of this message is to love your enemies, and so I was thinking to myself, I was like, who was my first ever enemy? Like just think, like, did you have a nemesis in middle school? Like, I don't know, a bully? Did you have a teacher that was your first ever enemy? Was it your mom or dad? For me, and for all middle children out there, I would say that your first ever nemesis/enemy was your older sibling. Anyone else? Yeah, you felt it. Like, you entered the world and they had this, like, toddler side eye for you, like straight out of the womb. And my older sister happens to be a redhead, and that'll make sense later. But I just felt like ever since I was born, she just had it out for me. She didn't like me. There was a moment on a swing where she pushed me and I fell off the swing, and I just felt like I saw a grin where there should have been like concern. There was another moment where we were on a pool table trying to throw the balls we were on top of the pool table. I don't know, kids. And we were racing for a ball, and I swear she pushed my back. Yeah, broke my arm. She's like, I didn't, you're making it up. No, wouldn't let her sign my cast. I was like, you will not sign this cast. And I was like, so like adamant about it. And then I woke up the next day, and in big letters, it was like, Mackenzie. And I was like, oh, I was just so mad. She was just my first enemy. And then I realized I started developing this bias against redheads. I did. And my little sister's like strawberry blonde, so then she came into the world, and I was like, get off my back. I just was like, why are you everywhere? And so I started developing this bias against redheads. And then, does anyone remember like the first horror film that they watched, like, and they shouldn't have? Like, you were like, my parents should not have let me watch that. Mine was Chucky. Yeah, horrifying. Like, we'll show a picture, sorry, God, of Chucky in a second. And then I saw the horror film of Chucky when I was about 7, and it really radically haunted me. And there were these 2 dolls that were always ever present in my room, and they're called Raggedy Ann dolls. Does anyone know what those are? Like creepy, like a lot of red, curly hair, and they would sit on this like rocking chair across from my bed. And it was just this trifecta of like my redheaded sister hating my guts, like I knew she hated my guts, and then watching Chucky, and then the Raggedy Ann dolls just in the corner of my room, and I just was like, I didn't know it at the time, but I did unknowingly develop a bias against redheads. And now I live with one, and it's like, every morning. And then Kendra dyes her red. I'm like, why? I love them now. But all that to say, I realized that I had this bias at this moment. My roommate, JoJo, she's right over here. I invited her to come tonight. JoJo, stand up. Guys, she has red hair, beautiful red hair. Wow, what a beauty. She's one of the youth pastors at our church. She's very good at what she does. And she's a great roommate. She only eats cereal, though. I don't get why. Nothing else. Is that weird? It's weird. There's a cereal bar tonight in her honor. All right, so she's talking about her, 25th birthday party, right? Yeah. And we're like, hey, what should we do? What's a cool theme? And she was like, what about iconic redheads, right? Yeah. Oh, first, can we show the picture of me and my sister? Wow, I have like visual. No, oh yeah, this is, wow. I should have put that up when I was telling the story. Those are my nemesis, okay? And then you have Darla from Nemo, obviously. Everyone hates Darla. And then she had headgear, and you're like, that poor girl, like, why'd you hate her? Okay, so then JoJo's talking about iconic redheads, okay? And so she's going through this list of redheads that people could dress up at the party. And so let's put the first slide up about the iconic redheads. Anna, you got it? You got it, girl? No? Yeah? Oh, so we got Meredith from The Office. Great redhead, iconic, like someone could dress up like Meredith. JoJo was like, I want to be, what's her name? No, Bam Bam. That little Flintstone girl. And then we got, obviously, part of their world, Ariel. Then we have Vincent Van Gogh, which is like high-end redhead. Like, that man, good for you. And then we move on to Queen Elizabeth I. Amazing redhead. Like, think about all the outfit ideas for this party. Like, amazing. You could also be the Muppet guy with the phone. I contemplated going that route just because my hair can kind of look like that at times. And then we got Ron Weasley. And then we have Reba McEntire. You guys know her. Work 2 jobs and never stop. I'm a survivor. Anyone? Okay. None of you grew up with a single mom. So just kidding. And so for me, I spaced out this whole time. She was like, Steven did. Pray for Steven. Okay. I spaced out this whole time she was throwing out all these suggestions because all I could think of were like villains. I was like, JoJo, You should be Chucky. Like, you should be Chucky. You'd be such a good Chucky. No, everyone would see it coming. You could get the tricycle. I even have a video of her riding a tricycle at being Chucky-like. And then I was like, oh, what else could she be? I was like, Darla. I could only think of, like, villain redheads. And then I had this epiphany when I was like, Syndrome. You look just like Syndrome from Incredibles. And then she's like, please, you are not the first person who has thought of that. Let's cue the video that she proceeded to show me. Some of us during COVID were productive. Others of us were not. Do we have audio? Any audio? Some of us were trapped inside, wondering when it was going to end. JoJo was making Syndrome lookalike videos with her sisters. And then it got me, oh, you could put the picture of the side-by-side too, just for fun, for the group. I just want to have fun this spring break. There we go. There she is, so beautiful, so pretty. Anyway, so all that to say, I realized she's like, why do you think I'm a villain? All these things, redheads. But then it got me to thinking about villains. Does anyone know who their favorite Disney villain is? Jake? Who? The guy from Shark Tales. That is niche. That is niche. Someone told me I give Ursula energy once, and I was like, thanks, that sucks. And so when we think about the word villain or enemy, I'm trying to get to this point where it feels like a fairy tale. Like when you hear Jesus talking about love your enemies, it feels almost like a fairy tale. Like, who's my enemy? Syndrome, he's gonna come and take over the world. Enemies don't really exist. And yes, there's enemies of war, there's people that don't like each other, but it feels like, oh, and then there's the enemy, Satan, rough. But that doesn't really feel like I have this big enemy in my life. I mean, I have some people I don't like, I have some nemesis, I have some people that are hard for me to love, but the idea of an enemy, I don't have some villain in my life coming after me. And so sometimes my fear in this is that we would read Jesus' teachings and we would exclude ourselves from it because we think it's just some fairy tale. Or we think because we don't have some villain in our life that Jesus couldn't possibly be talking to me. And it feels like we can easily disqualify ourselves and exclude ourselves from Jesus' harder teachings because we don't think that he's talking about us. Now, the point that I want to get to is this. When I talk about who are your enemies, is this. Rich Villodas in The Narrow Path has a quote, and it defines an enemy as this. And once I read this definition, I want you to think really hard about how many enemies you have in light of this definition, okay? Right now, think, do you have an enemy? Okay, no one comes to mind. Maybe that, rude person who took my parking spot, or like I'm sure you have some petty ones, but do you have a real enemy? His quote is this: an enemy is anyone you have a hard time loving. Now, in light of that definition, how many of you have 10 plus enemies? Come on, thank you. People are like, yeah, okay, gosh, she sees me. Hands everywhere, yeah. Anyone you have a hard time loving. Now, in light of that, there are ops everywhere, aren't there? I'm sure even before you got here tonight, you said, well, who's gonna be there? My ex? How many of you actively avoid people in this lobby? How many of you actively avoid people on a Sunday? How many of you go to this Starbucks because there's that person's kind of off in this Starbucks? And how many of you unfollow people on Instagram daily? How many of you slid into their DMs, they didn't respond, and you're like, well, I don't like you, you're ugly anyway. Yeah. Who are your ops? Because it feels like they're everywhere when that definition is on display. Now, it could be a parent. It could even be someone that you say is your best friend, but you have a weird frenemy relationship where you're like, something's off, but like, we're gonna keep being friends because I need a carpool and it's been lonely. Or maybe you're dating someone and you're like, you are really hard for me to love most of the time. And when Jesus asks us to pray for our enemies, we don't end up praying for the people that are hard to love because that's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about the villains in my life, and I don't have any because I'm a really good, well-behaved Christian. I don't have any enemies. I don't have any bitterness in my heart. I mean, there's some people that are really annoying, and I can't stand them, and I don't want to be in their company. And if they look at me wrong, I just am so annoyed, and it ruined my entire day. But I have anger fantasies about hurting somebody or flipping them the bird or cussing them out but I don't have any enemies. And the reason that Jesus, and I think Rich redefines this as anyone that is hard to love, is because Jesus doesn't want to slap you on the wrist because you're misbehaving. Jesus cares about the very condition of your heart. And bitterness and hate is poison to our hearts. It's poison to our hearts. And so the reason I'm going to go in on this is because I really believe that when Jesus came to fulfill the law was a really good thing, that a lot of the Pharisees said that they could obey all the things, but the condition of their hearts were hateful and well-behaved. And how could the church be the hope of the world if we are just playing make pretend on the outside, but on the inside it's bitter and hateful and stony and walled up? When was the last time you prayed for somebody that is hard for you to love? When was the last time you genuinely did? For me, it had been a while when I was writing this. I was like, yikes. And so the question is this: what are Jesus' instructions for how to treat these people? Brace yourself. I wish that it was really complex and complicated. And I think Christians really like to debate the really fringe parts of Christianity. And they're like, let's see if you can get a tattoo or not. Let's flip to the Old Testament. Context. Let's debate about it. But the red letters of the Bible, Jesus' very own words in Sermon on the Mount, we don't even want to walk in because we'd rather sit on our couches and debate the fringe issues. Are you even doing what he said? Are you even doing what he said? And it's not wrong to debate and have discussions, but I think if we're not careful, we'll be a group of Christians that know how to play Christian, but on the inside, we're hateful. And we're like, God, help me love people because I don't love anyone naturally. And you said that my love would be an overflow, but right now it feels like there's not one drop to give anybody. And so the next point I want to make is, what if we don't want to love our enemies? And I feel you. I'm like, I don't want to. I read, Jesus says that, and I'm hearing it, and I'm like, don't love that. It's like in sports when it's like a fitness day. You're like, I see no cones out on the field, just a starting line and a whistle and a timer. It's going to be a horrible day. And I think of that. Have you seen that image of, how many of you had parents that forced you to hug your siblings when you were mad at each other? Yeah. There's this meme of these two siblings that had to get into this giant shirt and slow dance together. And there's a music playing and both of them are looking in opposite directions. And it's the most uncomfortable thing I've ever seen. Our soccer team would do this stupid passive aggressive thing. When we beat a team, we would make a tunnel and say, we are proud of you. And we would just go, we are proud of you. We are proud of you. And their parents would force the losing team to begrudgingly walk through the tunnel. And I swear a girl was gonna punch me in the gut, and I was just so smug. I'm like, we're so proud of you. Remember when I scored on you? Huh, good. 4-0, scoreboard. I would whisper stuff. There's just nothing worse than a forced reconciliation or a forced love. And so Jesus actually doesn't want you to be an externally well-behaved Christian with a hateful heart. Yes, there is this idea of being civil and God getting our hearts there, for sure. I'm not saying you have to be this is how I feel, loser, I hate you, but I'm working on it. We don't need to go there. Don't mishear me. Just a lot of people are gonna just be having so many horrible conversations after this. That's not the goal. But I do know that God cares about your heart and that he wants you to be free and that he also wants you to actually taste and see that he is good. Here's what Jesus doesn't want. He doesn't want a bunch of Christians just discarding all of the wounds in the past and ghosting people left and right and saying the vibes were off and their energy was weird, or they were just dragging me down, or blaming other people for our insecurities or our frustrations or our hurts. I do know that a lot of you in this room have real reason to be grieving the ways you were hurt. And you have real frustrations and you have real brokenness that people have caused and that you long for justice. I know that God sees that. But I also know he doesn't want to live you to live your life in avoidance, because you actually don't. You could say that you do Jesus' commands if you avoid people altogether. Jesus' commands would be so easy to do if you lived in a vacuum. They really would. But we're actually called to community. And so avoidance and isolation and saying that I'm the kind of Christian that doesn't need a body is also not in line with what Jesus has called us to do. He also doesn't want us to be fake or gossipy and to be venting about people. There's someone you can process things with, but at the end of the day, you might need to have a talk. And also, There are some Christians that say they're being persecuted by our world. And that persecution is very real, but I have seen a narrative of Christians that say, well, they said they didn't like a Christian and I immediately didn't like them, so then I was being kind of standoffish to them at Starbucks. And I'm like, so they're really gonna want to come to church then? Sick. Well, they said they didn't like Christianity and they were being kind of rude to me, and so I gave them exactly what they gave me. I'm like, so you showed them the opposite of the gospel to make them like Christians. That makes sense. Are you being persecuted, or are you kind of being a jerk and then someone's holding up a mirror and doing the same back? Sorry. I've just seen it a lot. And here's my fear for you as your pastor is this: have we been inoculated to the gospel as Christians? Now, inoculation is this. It's a vaccine that is introduced weakened forms of a virus to the body to build up resistance. And so are we exposed and practicing a weakened, diluted, surface-level version of the gospel, just enough to make us resistant to the full transformative power that the gospel is supposed to bring? If we've reduced Jesus' teachings to smile and be nice, and on the inside it's dark and it's bitter and it's stony, we wonder why we're not tasting and seeing that Jesus is good, and we're not seeing that he's transforming our relationships and restoring things and fixing broken things and healing past relationships. And we wonder. And my fear is that we're going to be a generation of Christians that have settled for this really weak version of Jesus' teachings and then wondered where all the power has gone from the living Christ. I don't want you to settle for some small little dose of the gospel. I don't want you to build resistance to the teachings of Jesus that are supposed to make everything new and that are supposed to bring heaven down. Are we so familiar with the cultural version of Christianity that we're not receptive to the real meaning of Jesus? Do we have a passive, immune-like response to repeated exposure of his message without true engagement with his teachings? True engagement with his teachings. And tonight you're going to have an opportunity to engage with what Jesus has asked us all to do. And so I'm going to dive into the text. So I'm going to break down Matthew 5:38-42, because when I first read this text, I was actually quite confused. And there's some things that Jesus, when he teaches, it's helpful to understand the cultural context in order to actually understand what the hearers would have been hearing at the time. And so there's this swing right now like when we're in conflict that I think a lot of Christians debate over. It's, okay, do I respond with violence and execute justice, or do I become a doormat and just passively receive anger and hits and frustration? And I think Christians are confused about how to respond to their enemies, or how to respond in a fight, or how to respond. And I really think it is confusing because Jesus offers us a third way in this text. A third way. One that isn't just a doormat, but also one that wouldn't fight to try to end violence with violence itself. And so Jesus actually has a very countercultural, very genius text here, and it's titled Retaliation. And so I already read it for you about turning the right cheek and the left cheek. And Jake, can you come up here really quick? I just want to do a quick demo, and I also have always wanted to slap you on the face. I'm kidding, you guys, I love Jake. No, I need you to come up here for real, though. And I didn't tell you about this before, and I should have, but I didn't. But you're always down for anything, right? Yeah, I'm down. Look at these cheeks, you guys. They just, wow. All right, do you guys know that slapping competition, the power slapping competition, where these two big dudes get chalk on their hands and they just freaking back and forth? Okay, so Jesus, just stay here for a second, okay? I probably brought you up here a little too early. It's fine. Jesus says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. So these are retaliation laws in the Old Testament that Jesus is bringing up. He's saying, this is how you used to hear it said. Now, the reason that these laws were in the Old Testament was actually a good thing, because typically if someone slaps me on the face, am I gonna slap them back with equal or more power? More. I'm doubling down. You will feel my fury. How many of you have a sibling that like punches you on the shoulder and like your arm's about to be on the ground? I don't know about you. Okay, maybe you're all too nice. Like, I am doubling down. And so Jake, in the past, if I slap Jake, you're gonna hit me back equal. That's what the law said. Okay, you can do it. You're fired. Just kidding. I've always wanted to say that to you. So Jesus is bringing up the retaliation laws that are in the Bible, and he's saying, that's what you've heard it said. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Stay here, okay? Then he says this, do not resist the one who is evil. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, how would I have to, why don't we just stand, face the crowd, face them. How would I have to hit Jake to hit him on his right cheek? With the back of my hand. I love a backhand. My sister used to have a punching bag, and I'd be like, ha! Like, there's just nothing like a backhand as opposed to, all right, I'm not violent. You are. Okay, so I would have to hit Jake with my backhand. Now, keep your face turned that way. So if somebody hit somebody with the back of their hand, the fine would be doubled because the severest public affront to somebody's dignity would be to hit them with the back of your hand. It would be me identifying Jake as a servant, as someone who in status is below me. Now, Jake, if you were to listen to Jesus' teachings and you were to turn your other cheek, what part of my hand would I be forced to hit Jake with? My palm. If you hit somebody with your palm as opposed to your backhand, you are actually approaching them as an equal. And so Jesus has you do a non-violent resistance, a protest that says you actually have to treat me and contend with me not as a servant, not as someone below you, but as an equal if you hit this side of my face, rendering me in a position to either walk away or to pull up your dignity. Whereas before I took it away. Sit down. Good job. Oh, wow. I need to go faster. I'm going to go faster. So, do you understand why Jesus says that now? I want to make a note for all the people in the room. If you've ever been in an abusive relationship and somebody has used that verse to keep you in said abusive relationship, they have pulled that verse out of context and had you remain in a situation that God had never intended you to remain in. If you are not given a context for this verse, you are being conned. And so if you find yourself in that context right now, find somebody with a badge or me or a pastor, and we will lovingly talk with you about how to get out of an abusive situation. We don't know everything, but we could point you in the right direction. But if anyone ever uses this teaching to keep you in an abusive context, they are misusing the text. I just need everyone in the room to know that. Okay. The Bible can be very dangerous can be used dangerously if you don't think and read and study. Okay, so Jesus says that. Now, you turn the other cheek. My approval doesn't come from you, but if you want, you can say we're equals. The next one is this: if they sue you and take your tunic, which means your shirt, you actually should also give them your cloak, which for poor people, their cloak was often the things that they slept with on the street or in their bed, and it kept them very, very warm. Now, why give them your cloak? This is an opportunity for you, if you are being sued or treated poorly, to be creatively generous, letting the person who took your shirt from you and also your cloak, leaving you nearly naked on the street, to now see just how greedy they are. Because it was actually really shameful to leave someone to the point of nudity. Public nudity was actually very, very shameful. And so if you were to say, no, take the rest of it, you are now creatively generous, and also that person has to contend with themselves and look in the mirror and say, am I the type of person that leaves somebody naked on the side of the road? You hold up a mirror to their heart. Instead of looking just like them and stealing in return, or looking just like them and hitting you back, Jesus doesn't want you to look like the oppressor. So he doesn't have you respond the way that the oppressor initiated, because he cares about your heart. And then the next one is this: if they force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. And this time, Roman soldiers would often randomly grab servants or slaves, and they would be considered objects of forced labor at the time, and they would give them a load to carry up a hill, and they'd say, you're gonna go 1 mile, you're gonna take this here. And the reason that Jesus says go with them 2, because in going 2 miles instead of 1, you've actually shifted the terms of the interaction. You have creatively resisted the oppression and asserted your dignity by willfully going the second mile. There's nobody I would go the second mile for unless you were my family or my friend. And so you thought you were gonna take from me. You thought you were gonna burden me. Well, I'm gonna be generous with you. I'm no servant, because guess what? Now that I've gone the mile you wanted me to go as a servant, I'm gonna go the extra one as a friend. And friends are equal. Do you see what Jesus is doing here? Is creative acts of resistance, utilizing mercy, grace, and generosity. He is fulfilling the law in this text. And so what we have here is powerful sacrificial love that prevents violent retaliation and also passive permission. That we would overcome evil through the power of nonviolent protest. This response ends the cycle of violence and begins the cycle of generosity. Retaliation would have us multiply violence, trying to eradicate violence with violence, which doesn't make sense. And Jesus' way stops violence and begins a new cycle. Isn't Jesus the best? We could not have come up with this. He comes to fulfill the law. And so I want you to think about what this looks like in your own life. And also, when you do these things in the context of your own world, maybe it's, they took your Starbucks, give them the straw. I have no idea how you're going to apply it. But don't do it smugly. Don't do it smugly. You do it because you truly do want to treat them as a friend. And so why do we love our enemies? Wait, did I get ahead? No. All right, I'm going to break down Matthew 5, verse 43. I'm going to just reread it really quickly. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you, this is the important part, you ready? So that you may be sons or daughters of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And then it goes on. And so Jesus, you have heard it said, he's pulling a commandment from the Old Testament, which is actually just love your neighbor. But people actually implied that if you love your neighbor, then there needs to be somebody we hate, and so therefore we hate our enemies. And he says, you've heard it said that way, but here's how I'm saying it. So that you love your enemies and pray for those who persecute, so that you may be sons and daughters of a Father who is in heaven. Now, there's something about kids running around that the way that they act or treat people in spaces show a lot about their family's values. How many of you play sports? Does anyone play volleyball? Okay. How many of you that played volleyball know if the ball hits the ground, like, it's not good? And for me, growing up, we had a lot of family values, but hustling and working your butt off and working hard no matter what was a huge family value. And so if I would play in a volleyball game and I would see the ball hit the ground and I didn't try for it or go for it, I just kind of lazily let it hit the ground, I would look up into the crowd and see my dad, and he would be like, you know, that dad, coach dad vibe. And because in that moment, even if we were winning 24-2, I broke a family value, because Mexicos don't let the ball drop. And I have a friend, Doug and Sandy, they live in Evergreen. They have these family values they've instilled in their children. They have an amazing view in Evergreen, Colorado. It's one of the best views. It overlooks the Three Sisters Mountain. You can see the sun setting on it. When it snows, it is like absolutely beautiful. And they have a living room where it's all windows. And if you're a morning person, you're just like, give me light. And I'm not, but it's still wonderful. But their kids and their whole family knows that there's a family value and a family rule that at the dining room table, there are going to be seats where the back is to the view. And then there are going to be seats where you're facing the beauty of it. And it was my first night living with them. I had interned at the church, and Aaron connected me with them, and I was going to be living with them for 9 months. And so I roll up with all my baggage to a stranger's house for God, and I'm like, why? 45 minutes away from the church, sick, with a Chevy Cruze and two-wheel drive, and I crashed a lot. We'll talk about that later. And I enter into the house, and dinner's already ready at the table, and everyone's seated, and there's two seats open that are facing the view. And I ask his kids, I'm like, why are you guys like all positioned? Do you have like assigned seats? And they're like, no, the guest gets the best view in the house. It's a family rule. These family rules that are ingrained in us, that I just want to do what my father told me to do because my father and my mother, they established these family rules. And then you go to this text and Jesus, it says, why do we love our enemies? And Jesus says, so that you may be sons and daughters of your Father who is in heaven. Because our Father in heaven has a family value. Oh, we love our enemies. We don't retaliate by slapping. We retaliate by generosity. The family rules in this house under our Father in heaven is that we aren't the Christians that shrink back, avoid, and say the vibes are off. We are the Christians that show up and pray for restoration and reconciliation. And why? And why? I want to be a son and a daughter. I want people to know who my Father is in heaven. And it goes on to say that God loves everybody, the evil and the good. And then he goes on to say that anyone can love those who love you. Did you know that all of the most infamous dictators in the world, and then you take it back to World War II and Nazi Germany where Jewish people, the large genocide, Jewish people being killed, and all of the people making those calls had wives and kids that they loved dearly. They did. They had so much love to give their loved ones. So much love. And Jesus says, even the tax collectors love their friends and moms and kids, of course. But there will be a reward for heaven for you for loving those who are hard to love. Are we the Christians that look like everybody else? Even the most evil among them have somebody to love and feel that love. They really do. But are we living the countercultural, transformative, sacrificial type of love that Jesus offered us first and foremost, and now works in and through us? How do we look? Who is our Father? And Van, you can come up. These rules, if you're in the room and you're not a Christian and you're like, she's intense. These rules aren't the rules to get into the family. Jesus did everything that needs to be done for you to get into the family, apart from you saying, I believe you. These are the rules of the family that you're already in. And guess what? They're not rules that we would be fake. They're rules that would transform us from the inside out, having us actually see the glory of God here on earth in our relationships and in others, and to show the heart of the Father to anybody who would look. It's a family thing. And that brings us to that we may be sons and daughters of our Father. Who is our Father? And what are we trying to show a broken world about our Father by the way that we love? Jesus would never ask you to do something that he didn't do first, show first, or give you first. Because did you know that you were once Jesus' enemy? And the ministry that he came down, the reason God came down, was not just a ministry of new things, but a reconciliation of all things, a redemption, a restoration of all broken things, our broken relationship with God. And so, as we found ourselves as Jesus' enemy, as God's enemy, Jesus would come down and he would model all of these loving your enemy images before us. As Jesus, who lived a perfect life and had a 3-year ministry, so many of the Pharisees and the Jews thought he was a false prophet, and they were really offended by his new teachings. These teachings would have deeply offended a lot of Jewish people because they thought Jesus was saying, oh, I have something better. But what he was actually saying is, I'm fulfilling this law. I don't want your hearts to just be well-behaved and hateful. I actually care about the condition of your heart. And Jesus would go and they would arrest him unfairly. He had done nothing wrong. And when Jesus is arrested in the garden, it's so unfair, even to the point where one of his disciples is like, he didn't do anything. And he cuts the ear off of the soldier. And Jesus so calmly heals that man's ear and tells everyone to back off. And he says, I give myself willingly. I go willingly. You're going willingly? Jesus, you didn't do anything wrong. And Jesus goes willingly. And he goes and he's arrested. And then he's on trial for something he didn't do, and he doesn't deserve to die, but Jesus isn't speaking up. He's not defending himself. Even Pontius Pilate is like, just say anything, and you won't have to do this. Say anything. And then Jesus, when he had every opportunity, he gets hit back and forth. He's being beaten, and he turns the other cheek, turns the other cheek, turns the other cheek. And then a crown of thorns, and then his tunic is taken, his robe is taken, he's nearly naked. And then he's forced to carry his cross, not just 1 mile, but he goes the extra mile, and he carries it to the top of a hill. And he's nailed to that cross, and he's at the top of the hill, and he turned the other cheek. He went willingly. He gave up his tunic. In fact, they were casting lots over it and trying to sell them and buy them. And even until his dying breath, Jesus says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus loved his enemies, those that would crucify him, those that our sin put him on that cross. He would love them until his very dying breath. And then you, if you're watching this like a movie, you're like, do something, do anything. I saw you feed 5,000 people. I saw you cure people. I saw you heal people. I saw you cast a demon. Do anything, do something to save yourself, Jesus. If I'm Jesus' disciple, I'm like, do anything. You can take yourself down from the cross. I mean, you say that you're God. Why wouldn't you? And for a moment, it looks like Jesus is incredibly passive and weak and useless and powerless. And even the disciples go back to fishing because, man, did we get it wrong? Have we been following the wrong God? I mean, he couldn't even take himself off the cross. And then what the Jewish people really wanted was Jesus to be violent, wanted him to come and overthrow Rome, wanted him to roll heads. They wanted Jesus to be a violent, conquering king that enacted justice through violence, and Jesus wouldn't do that either. And so you have Jesus incredibly disappointing both parties. But as we near Easter, what you'll realize is we have the resurrection, which means that Jesus wasn't just a passive doormat, but he also refused to try to cure violence with more violence. And what Jesus did when he defeated death is he proved that sacrificial love conquers all. It conquers all. And so why? Why, as a Christian, is it important for us to love our enemies? Because more than your kindness, your niceness, which is all awesome, the way that people are going to know that Jesus is true and real and good is if you love them and they can't find one reason why. And you forgave them and they can't find one reason why you would. I don't know if any of you in this room have ever been loved when you didn't deserve it, but it's the best feeling in the world that you would love them and you would fight for reconciliation and they can't find one reason why. The point is that when we love our enemies, it shows ourselves and others the gospel, that you were an enemy of God first, and that his sacrificial love defeated the real and true enemy, which is sin. In Romans 5, 6, 8, it says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? And this is my last point, and I'm going long, and I'm sorry. How do we pray for our enemies? Because I want us to end on a practical note. I'm just going to break down a moment where I prayed for my enemies, and here's the deal. I never once felt like praying for my enemy, actually. It was I'm doing this because God said, and I literally don't know what else to do. And there was a girl, I was in college pole vaulting, and there was a girl who hated my guts for no reason. You ever have someone that just doesn't like you, and you're like, I'm just here. Do I remind you of an ex? What is going on? Or do I remind you of like your mom, like that you don't like? She hated me for no reason. And I couldn't be nice enough to get her to like me. And I felt like she was treating me horribly, and she would like horrible. And at one point I was like crying about it as an adult woman. And I was like, what is going on? I am being bullied as an adult. And I honestly, like, I vented about her. I avoided her. I like tried to read verses and be like, like I had a hateful heart towards her, but I was trying to be well behaved. And it was like the harder I tried to get her to like me, she just hated me more and more. And I got to this point where I was like, you know what? I remember once in the Bible, it said that Christians are supposed to love their enemies, and that Jesus said that if we prayed for that, we need to pray for our enemies. And I was like, this is my last resort. It really was. And I marched my way up to this little white chapel on my college campus that nobody was ever in. And I walked in, and there's just a few wooden pews. And I go to the front, and I drop down to my knees, and I said, God, I don't know how to do this, but I know you told me to do it. And so I'm trying, God, but I just want to pray for Taylor. It honestly felt so awkward. I was like, I hate her. But actually, how I did start, and this is point one of this, is I want you to feel your feels. You need to pray your anger and your grief, because some of you have a lot of grief and a lot of wounds from some people. Maybe it's an ex, maybe it's your parents, maybe it's friends in this room. Maybe it's, I don't know who it is, but some of you have a lot of grief and a lot of rage. And did you know that you can bring that before the Father, that He actually wants it, and He can carry it, and He can hear it? And so you need to feel your feels first, so that we don't become well-behaved, hateful-hearted people, but we say, we're honest before God. And the second one, so I go down to my knees, and I'm so mad at Taylor. I'm like, I said some words, some choice words about Taylor to God. And then the second one is this: feel their feels. Humanize and empathize this person that is your enemy. Admit that you don't have the full picture, and ask God, what must be the state of their heart within the larger story of their life that they'd be treating me like this? Because hurt people hurt people. And I want to define empathy really quick, because I think we have an empathy deficit in our world right now. I think we have an empathy deficit, and in fact, I'm hearing the word empathy thrown around like it's a bad thing, and it's not. Empathy is the ability to understand and share someone else's feelings. And there was a man named Gustav Gilbert who wrote the Nuremberg Diary. In Nazi Germany, once the war ended, they actually had these trials called the Nuremberg trials, where they put all of the Nazi officers on trial, and this man would go into the prisons and he would interview them. He was just so curious. How did these men and women get to this decision to be killing so many people? How did they get there? And this man, who's a prison psychologist, ends with this quote in his book. It says this: I told you once, and I was searching for the nature of evil. I think I've come close to defining it. It's a lack of empathy. It's the one characteristic that connects all the defendants, a genuine incapacity to feel with their fellow man. Evil, I think, is the absence of empathy. It's like you want to clap because you're like, that sucks, but like, and then the next one is this. And here's the thing about empathy is you have to actually close your eyes and imagine yourself as them, a day in the life, what they've been through, what they've gone through. That doesn't excuse what they've done, mind you. And the next one is this: let God's love lead. Choose compassion. God, you love them like you love me. You died for them and me. You hear their prayers and mine. Imagine them at the feet of Jesus and Him catching every single tear, desiring to heal them, desiring to restore their heart. He loves them more than you ever could, and He died for them too. You have to choose that path. You have to choose to go there. And then the last one is this, and I remember on my knees, I say, God, I need you to move. I need you to move, and I waited. I think we have a waiting problem in this culture. Some of you need to wait in the presence of God after you asked Him something. Sometimes I think we ask God a question and then we let our minds ruminate instead of meditate. And so then it's time to wait. And then repeat. Do it the next morning, and then the next morning, and then the next morning, and then the next morning. Because if there's any miracle that I can stand in front of you and tell you that is the greatest miracle I've bared witness to in my entire life, is the miracle of my own transformed heart. That I really would go from not liking someone to loving them deeply. That is the supernatural work of Christ. That's when lives start to change. That's when a broken world starts to believe that there is a God that never gave up on them, not even for a second, no matter how far away they felt. That's when people see the gospel in and through your love. And so you can stand as I close. I'm just so excited for us to be Christians that do what God has asked us to do, so that our broken world would see Christians and not say they're well-behaved people with hateful hearts, but they would say, man, I'm so curious. I'm so curious when they turn the other cheek, or they walk the extra mile, or they were generous when I was hateful. I'm so curious about a God who would never give up on me. And so I commission you with the ministry of reconciliation in 2 Corinthians 5:18. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the calling, the high calling, to the ministry of reconciliation. You are called to see the transformative power of Jesus. Don't you dare settle for some shallow version. Do not become inoculated to the gospel. Let him change your heart from the inside out. And let's be agents of restoring relationships in our broken world. And we're about to go into a song called Make Room. And I don't want this to just be take-home homework. I want us to try to encounter God in this moment. I want you to close your eyes right now. And maybe that God has already been kind of knocking on the door of your heart with one name, one person, one relationships. And this doesn't mean you need to go confront them or talk to them. He might just change your heart right here and right now. Or maybe this tonight is going to be the beginning of you praying for them every single day. Just look and see what he could do. And so right now I want you to think, oh God, who is it? Who is it? Who have I been hating? Who's been hard to love? And I want you to go through these 4 steps that are going to be on the wall behind me. And I'm going to pray for us. But the last thing I want to say is, hey, at Red Rocks Young Adults and in this church, at Red Rocks Church, in this house, in this family, we love our enemies. And if you need help to do that, that's why we come here together. And I'm going to pray. God, I thank you for every single person in this room. Lord, I pray that you'd be near to the brokenhearted. I pray for those that are going to start step 1 and they're going to be full of grief and anger because they have been wronged and they have been hurt, and there have been people that have done things to them that are not okay and that you don't approve of. I pray for all those people, Lord. I pray that first and foremost they will know that you're a God that is with them and that you are their refuge and that you want to heal their heart. And then I pray for the people that are doing the really hard work of choosing empathy. Lord, I pray that you would give each one of us your heart for each person that has wronged us. Lord, would you go to work in this room right now? In Jesus' name, amen.